What's that supposed to do with that?
What you like? That's
What?
There are some things about the 1960s that newer generations will never understand, and one of the biggest differences was the quality of the food we ate. If you grew up during this time, you probably remember going to the local butcher shop with your mom or dad and watching them cut fresh meat right in front of you. That meat was nothing like what you find in the grocery store today. It came from animals that were raised completely differently, and it tasted better, smelled better, and was actually better for you. So let's take a look back at why the meat from the 1960s was a true superfood, while modern meat might be making you sick. The local butcher knew your family by name. There are some things about the 1960s that newer generations will never fully understand. And one of the biggest differences was the quality of the food we ate. If you grew up then, you probably remember walking into the local butcher with your parents and watching fresh meat cut right in front of you. That meat was nothing like what we find in supermarkets today. It came from animals raised on pastures, eating natural diets, free from antibiotics and growth hormones, and slaughtered locally. It smelled fresh, tasted rich, and nourished the body in ways modern meat often cannot. All beef was grass-fed, and chickens and pigs grew slowly, developing real muscle, flavor, and nutrient density. Fat wasn't feared. It was rich in omega-3 fatty acids, conjugated linoleic acid, CLA, and fat-soluble vitamins like A and E. Families knew their butcher, and the butcher knew the farmer. There was accountability at every step of the meat chain. Animals lived outdoors, moved freely, and were treated humanely, which naturally translated into better tasting, healthier meat. Flavor came from the animal's natural diet and the care with which meat was aged and prepared. Modern meat, by contrast, comes from factory farms. Cattle are grain-fed, confined, and often fed byproducts like bakery waste, while pigs and chickens grow unnaturally fast and are routinely given antibiotics and hormones. Nutrients are lower, the omega-6 content is high, and harmful bacteria like E. coli and salmonella are more common. Cheap, convenient meat comes with hidden costs. It contributes to chronic disease, stresses the environment, and undermines rural farming communities. If you want meat that resembles what people ate in the 60s, look for grass-fed beef, pasture-raised chicken, and pork from small, responsible farms. Yes, it costs more, but you're paying for flavor, nutrient density, and a food system that respects both animals and the land. The meat of the 60s wasn't just food, it was a superfood. By seeking out quality today, we can reclaim some of that nourishment, flavor, and connection to our food that modern industrial agriculture has largely lost. Grass-fed was just called beef. In the 1960s, asking for grass-fed beef would have seemed odd because all beef was grass-fed. There were no feedlots, no corn or soy to fatten cattle, and no premium labels required. Cows spent their lives roaming pastures, grazing on grass, clover, and whatever grew naturally. This was simply how cattle were raised. Grass-fed beef is nutritionally superior to grain-fed meat. When cows eat grass, their meat is rich in omega-3 fatty acids, which support brain health and help reduce inflammation. It also contains higher levels of vitamins A and E, along with antioxidants, and has a healthier ratio of omega-3s to omega-6s, making it better for heart health. In the 60s, people didn't talk about omega-3s or antioxidants. They just knew the meat tasted good and was nourishing. Fat wasn't feared. It provided energy and helped the body absorb fat-soluble vitamins. The shift away from grass-fed beef began in the 50s and accelerated through the 70s as industrial agriculture took hold. Grain-fed cattle reach market weight in 12 to 18 months, compared to 2 or 3 years on pasture. It was cheaper and more profitable, but it came at a nutritional cost. Grain-fed beef is lower in omega-3s, higher in omega-6s, and contains more total and saturated fat, contributing to inflammation and offering fewer health benefits. Today, grass-fed beef is a specialty item, often costing 2 or 3 times as much as conventional beef. In the 60s, it was simply beef, the standard fare for families. Every steak, hamburger, and roast came from animals raised on pasture, naturally nutrient-dense and wholesome. What was ordinary then would now be considered a superfood, a lost standard of quality in our modern diet. No antibiotics, because animals weren't sick. One of the biggest differences between meat in the 1960s and today is antibiotics. Back then, farmers didn't pump their animals full of drugs because there was no need. Animals lived outdoors, had space to move, weren't stressed, and rarely got sick. Healthy conditions meant healthy animals. Today, roughly 80% of antibiotics sold in the US go to farm animals. They're not just treating illness, they're preventing it in overcrowded, unsanitary factory farms. Chickens, pigs, and cattle are packed tightly, where disease spreads quickly. Farmers dose them regularly so they survive until slaughter. This widespread use drives antibiotic resistance, creating bacteria that no longer respond to treatment, a major global health threat recognized by the World Health Organization. In the 60s, if a cow got sick, a vet might treat that individual. Herd-wide dosing was unnecessary because animals thrived in pastures with clean water, fresh air, sunlight, and space to move. The meat you bought was naturally antibiotic-free, clean, and safe, raised the way humans had been raising animals for centuries. Today, even antibiotic-free labels can be misleading. They may mean the animal stopped receiving drugs weeks before slaughter, not that it was never treated. Regulations are inconsistent and transparency is low. Back in the 60s, no label was needed. All meat was antibiotic-free. Families ate their beef, pork, and chicken, knowing it was pure, safe, and natural, a benefit modern consumers often take for granted. Cows moved around and ate real food. In the 1960s, if you drove past a farm, you'd see cows out in fields grazing on grass, moving from one section of pasture to another in a natural pattern. This rotational grazing allowed grass to regrow, kept cows healthy, and naturally fertilized and aerated the soil. Cows are ruminants, built to digest grass and fibrous plants. Their bodies thrived on this natural diet, and the meat reflected their health, leaner, nutrient-rich, and flavorful. Modern cattle farming looks nothing like this. Most beef today comes from feedlots, crowded dirt pens designed to fatten cattle as quickly as possible. These animals are fed grain, soy, byproducts, and sometimes even candy. This unnatural diet causes digestive issues like acidosis, which can lead to liver problems, ulcers, and general poor health. To keep them alive, farmers routinely use antibiotics and medications. Meat from feedlot cattle is fundamentally different from pasture-raised beef. It's higher in total and saturated fat, lower in omega-3 fatty acids and antioxidants, and less flavorful. Grass-fed beef has a complex, slightly earthy taste, while grain-fed beef tends to be bland and fatty. In the 60s, feedlots were rare. Plenty of pasture existed, farms were smaller and diversified, and raising cattle on grass was standard practice. Industrialization in the 70s and 80s made feedlots dominant. Today, roughly 97% of US beef spends part of its life in a feedlot. Grass-fed beef, once the norm, is now a niche luxury, far removed from the everyday meals of the 1960s. The fat was actually good for you. During the 1960s and before people didn't fear fat the way we do today, butter, lard, and the fat from meat were considered healthy sources of energy. Your grandmother probably cooked with lard or beef tallow, and nobody thought twice about it. That's because the fat from animals raised on pasture is genuinely good for you. It contains a balance of fatty acids that your body needs, including saturated fats that are essential for hormone production, brain function, and cell membrane integrity. The fat in grass-fed beef from the 60s was rich in something called conjugated linoleic acid, or CLA. This is a type of fat that has been shown to have anti-cancer properties, improve immune function, and help with weight management. Grass-fed beef has about 3 to 5 times more CLA than grain-fed beef. So when you ate a marble steak in the 60s, you were getting a dose of CLA along with your protein. This was good fat that helped your body function properly. The demonization of fat started in the 1950s when a scientist named Ansel Keys proposed that saturated fat was the cause of heart disease. This theory became widely accepted even though it was based on flawed research, and it led to decades of low-fat dietary recommendations. People were told to avoid butter red meat and other sources of saturated fat, and to replace them with vegetable oils and margarine. The problem was that this advice was dead wrong. We now know that saturated fat from healthy sources isn't the villain it was made out to be. In fact, your body needs saturated fat to produce hormones like testosterone and estrogen to build healthy cell membranes and to absorb fat-soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K. The real problem is when you combine a diet high in refined carbohydrates and sugar with unhealthy fats like trans fats and heavily processed vegetable oils. That combination is what leads to inflammation, obesity, and heart disease. But the meat from the 1960s didn't have those problems. The fat in that meat was clean, natural, and nutrient-dense. When your mom made pot roast and the whole house smelled like beef and onions, you were smelling real food. The fat that rendered out of that roast wasn't something to be skimmed off and thrown away. It was liquid gold full of flavor and nutrition. People would save that fat and use it to cook vegetables or fry eggs, and they were healthier for it. Today, people are so afraid of fat that they buy the leanest cuts of meat they can find. They trim off all the visible fat before cooking, and they pat their cooked meat with paper towels to remove every last drop of grease. This fear of fat has led to a generation of people who are nutrient deficient and constantly hungry, because fat is what provides satiety. When you eat fat, you feel full and satisfied. When you avoid fat, you're left feeling hungry, no matter how much you eat. The meat from the 1960s with all its natural fat was a superfood. It provided complete protein essential fatty acids, fat-soluble vitamins, and minerals like iron and zinc. It was food that nourished your body and kept you healthy. The shift away from fatty meat and toward lean meat was driven by bad science and corporate interests, not by what's actually good for your health. Chickens took twice as long to grow. If you ate chicken in the 1960s, you were eating a bird that took about 16 weeks to grow, from a chick to a full-size chicken ready for market. These chickens were typically raised on small farms where they had access to the outdoors. They would scratch around in the dirt eating bugs, worms, and grass, along with whatever grain the farmer gave them. This is how chickens are meant to live, and it resulted in meat that was flavorful, firm, and nutritious. Compare that to today's chickens, which are raised in massive industrial operations and reach market weight in just 6 to 7 weeks. That's less than half the time it took in the 60s. How is this possible? Through selective breeding, antibiotics growth, promoting drugs, and a highly controlled environment that maximizes growth and minimizes the time it takes to get the bird to slaughter weight. Modern chickens are bred to grow so fast that their bodies can't keep up. They develop leg problems because their bones can't support their rapidly increasing body weight. They have heart and lung issues because their organs don't grow as fast as their muscles. Many of these chickens can barely walk by the time they're ready for slaughter. This is not normal, and it's not healthy for the chickens or for the people who eat them. The chickens from the 60s were smaller and tougher than modern chickens, but they were also more flavorful. If you remember eating fried chicken at your grandmother's house, you probably remember how good it tasted. That flavor came from a chicken that had lived a longer life and had developed real muscle tissue. The meat was denser, and it had a distinct chicken flavor that you just don't get from the bland, watery chicken breasts you find in supermarkets today. The nutritional profile of chicken has also changed dramatically. Chicken from the 60s had more protein and less fat. Modern chickens are much fattier because they've been bred for size, not quality. In fact, studies have shown that chicken today has about 2 to 3 times more fat than it did 50 years ago. That fat isn't the good kind either, because the chickens are fed grain-based diets just like cattle, and they're raised in stressful conditions that affect the quality of their meat. Another issue with modern chickens is the way they're processed. After slaughter, the chickens are dunked in a bath of chlorinated water to kill bacteria. This sounds like a good idea until you realize that the reason there's so much bacteria in the first place is because of the unsanitary conditions in the processing plants. The chickens are processed at such high speeds that fecal matter and other contaminants often end up on the meat. The chlorine bath is supposed to fix this, but it doesn't always work, and it certainly doesn't make the meat any healthier. In the 1960s, chicken processing was done on a much smaller scale. Local farmers would raise chickens and process them on the farm, or take them to a local processor. The whole operation was slower, more careful, and more sanitary. You knew where your chicken came from, and you could trust that it was raised and processed properly. Today, that kind of transparency is nearly impossible to find unless you're willing to pay a premium for pasture-raised organic chicken from a small farm. No growth hormones were pumped into animals. One of the most disturbing aspects of modern meat production is the use of growth hormones. In the United States, it's legal to give beef cattle hormones that make them grow faster and bigger. These hormones include estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone, along with synthetic versions of these hormones. The idea is that by giving cattle these hormones, they will gain weight more quickly, which means more meat per animal and higher profits for the producer. In the 1960s, this practice didn't exist on any significant scale. Farmers didn't have access to these synthetic hormones. And even if they did, they wouldn't have needed them, because cattle grew just fine on their own when raised properly. A steer raised on pasture would reach market weight in 2 to 3 years. And that was perfectly acceptable. There was no rush to get the animal to slaughter as fast as possible because the economics of farming were different. The use of growth hormones in cattle has been controversial for decades. The European Union banned the practice in 1989, citing concerns about the potential health effects on humans. Studies have shown that hormone residues can remain in the meat, and that consuming these hormones might be linked to early puberty in children and increased cancer risk, particularly hormone-related cancers like breast and prostate cancer. The United States government maintains that the levels of hormones in beef are safe, but many people remain skeptical. What we do know is that the meat from cattle that haven't been given growth hormones is different from the meat from cattle that have. Hormone-free beef tends to be leaner, and it doesn't have the same hormone residues that conventional beef does. If you're eating meat today and it's not labeled hormone-free, then there's a good chance it came from an animal that was given growth hormones at some point in its life. In the 1960s, you didn't have to worry about any of this. The beef you bought from the butcher came from cattle that had been raised naturally without any hormones or drugs. The meat was clean and pure, and you could feed it to your children without worrying about what it might do to their developing bodies. That peace of mind is something we've lost in the modern food system, where the default is to use every available tool to maximize production regardless of the long-term health consequences. The same issue exists with pork. Although growth hormones aren't used in pigs the way they are in cattle. Instead, pigs are given a drug called ractopamine, which promotes muscle growth and reduces fat. This drug is banned in over 160 countries, including China and the European Union, but it's still legal in the United States. Pork from the 60s didn't have ractopamine or any other growth-promoting drugs, because those drugs hadn't been invented yet. The pork was just pork from pigs that were raised on small farms and fed a natural diet. The meat came from small local farms. The landscape of American agriculture in the 1960s was completely different from what it is today. Back then, the majority of meat came from small family farms that raised a variety of animals. A typical farm might have a few dozen cattle, a couple hundred chickens, some pigs, and maybe a few sheep. These farms were diversified, which meant that the animals were part of a larger ecosystem. The manure from the animals fertilized the fields. The fields grew crops that fed the animals, and the whole system was relatively self-sustaining. These small farms were scattered all over the country, and they supplied meat to their local communities. The cattle you ate might have come from a farm just 10 miles down the road. The chickens your mom roasted for Sunday dinner could have been raised by your neighbor. This local food system meant that the meat was fresh. It didn't have to travel hundreds or thousands of miles to get to your table, and there was a direct connection between the consumer and the producer. Today, the meat industry is dominated by a handful of massive corporations. 4 companies control over 80% of the beef market in the United States. The same consolidation has happened in pork and chicken. These corporations own giant factory farms and processing plants that produce meat on an industrial scale. The small family farms that used to supply most of America's meat have been driven out of business because they can't compete with the low prices and high volumes of the industrial producers. This consolidation has had devastating effects not just on the quality of the meat, but on rural communities and the environment. When a small farm goes out of business, the family that ran it loses their livelihood and often their land. The community loses a source of local food and local economic activity. And the land that was once pasture often gets turned into either a factory farm or a subdivision. The result is that we've lost millions of small farms over the last 50 years. And with them, we've lost a way of life and a food system that actually worked. The meat from small farms in the 60s was better because the farmers cared about their animals. They weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They were living creatures that the farmer saw every single day. A farmer who raises 50 cattle knows each animal individually. He knows which ones are more aggressive, which ones are more docile, which ones need a little extra care. This kind of personal attention results in healthier animals and better meat. In a factory farm with thousands of animals, there's no way to give individual attention to each one. The animals are treated as units of production to be managed as efficiently as possible. They are kept in confinement, fed a controlled diet, and processed through the system as quickly as possible. The focus is on maximizing output, and minimizing cost and quality becomes secondary. The shift from small farms to factory farms happened gradually over the course of several decades. But by the 1980s, the transformation was largely complete. Today, if you want meat from a small local farm, you have to seek it out. You might have to go to a farmer's market or buy directly from the farmer. And you'll pay more for it because small-scale farming is more labor-intensive and less efficient than industrial farming. But back in the 60s, this was just normal meat. It was what everyone ate, and it was affordable for working-class families. Animals were slaughtered humanely and locally. The process of getting meat from the farm to your dinner table in the 1960s was much simpler than it is today. When it was time to slaughter an animal, the farmer would either do it himself on the farm or take the animal to a local slaughterhouse. These small slaughterhouses were common in rural areas, and they processed animals from the surrounding farms. The whole process was done on a smaller scale, which meant it could be done more carefully and humanely. Animals that are stressed before slaughter produce lower quality meat. When an animal is frightened or in pain, its body releases stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. These hormones affect the meat, making it tougher and giving it an off flavor. Farmers in the 60s understood this, and they took steps to keep the animals calm. A cow that lived its whole life on a farm and was slaughtered there experienced far less stress than a cow that's loaded onto a truck, driven hundreds of miles to a massive slaughterhouse, and then processed in a facility where thousands of animals are killed every day. Modern slaughterhouses are highly industrialized operations designed to process animals as quickly as possible. A large beef slaughterhouse can kill and process up to 400 cattle per hour. That's one animal every 9 seconds. At that speed, mistakes happen. Animals aren't always stunned properly before they're killed. The line moves so fast that workers don't have time to ensure every animal is unconscious before it's slaughtered. This is not only inhumane, but it also affects the quality of the meat because the animals are stressed and suffering. In the 60s, the pace was much slower. A small slaughterhouse might process a few dozen animals in a day, not hundreds per hour. This allowed the workers to take their time and to treat each animal with care. The farmer who raised the animal often stayed to make sure it was handled properly. There was a sense of respect for the animal and an understanding that if you're going to take a life for food, you should do it as humanely as possible. Another issue with modern slaughterhouses is sanitation. When you're processing animals at such high speeds, it's easy for contamination to occur. Fecal matter and other contaminants can get on the meat, especially during the evisceration process when the intestines are removed. To combat this, the carcasses are sprayed with antimicrobial solutions and sometimes even ammonia. But these chemical treatments are a band-aid solution to a problem that's caused by the speed and scale of the operation. In the 60s, slaughterhouses were cleaner because they operated at a more reasonable pace. There was time to do things right, to keep the facility clean, and to ensure that the meat all wasn't contaminated. The meat you bought from the butcher was clean, not because it had been sprayed with chemicals, but because it had been handled properly from start to finish. The distance between the farm and the slaughterhouse was also much shorter in the 60s. Today, animals are often transported hundreds or even thousands of miles from the farm, where they were raised, to the slaughterhouse where they'll be killed. This long-distance transport is stressful for the animals, and it also increases the risk of disease spread. In the 60s, most animals traveled only a few miles from the farm to the slaughterhouse, if they left the farm at all. This kept the animals healthier and less stressed, and it resulted in better quality meat. The flavor was completely different. The flavor was completely different. If you were lucky enough to eat meat in the 1960s, you probably remember how different it tasted compared to what's available today. The flavor was richer, more complex, and more satisfying. A steak from the 60s had a beefy flavor that you could really taste. The chicken actually tasted like chicken, not like the bland, watery meat you find in most grocery stores today. Pork had a sweet, slightly nutty flavor that came from pigs that were allowed to forage and eat a varied diet. The flavor of meat is directly related to what the animal ate and how it lived. Grass-fed beef has a different flavor than grain-fed beef because the grasses and other plants the cow eats impart specific flavors to the meat. Pasture-raised chicken that ate bugs and worms along with grain has a more complex flavor than chicken that was raised in confinement and fed only processed feed. The same is true for pork and lamb and every other kind of meat. In the 1960s, the diet of farm animals was more varied and more natural. Cattle ate grass and whatever else grew in the pasture, including clover wildflowers and herbs. Chickens ate bugs, kitchen scraps, and grain. Pigs were often allowed to forage in the woods where they would eat acorns, roots, and whatever else they could find. This varied diet resulted in meat that had depth and character. Every bite was an experience. Today's meat is bland by comparison. Feedlot cattle eat a diet that's almost entirely corn and soy, supplemented with various byproducts and additives. This diet is designed to fatten the animals as quickly as possible, not to produce flavorful meat. The result is beef that tastes flat and one-dimensional. The same is true for chicken and pork. Factory-farmed animals are fed controlled diets that prioritize growth and efficiency over flavor. The way meat is aged also affects its flavor. In the 60s, beef was often dry-aged for several weeks before it was sold. Dry aging is a process where the meat is hung in a controlled environment and allowed to age. During this time, enzymes in the meat break down the muscle tissue, which makes it more tender and concentrates the flavor. Dry-aged beef has a nutty, almost cheese-like flavor that's highly prized by steak lovers. Today, most beef is wet-aged, which means it's vacuum-sealed in plastic and aged in its own juices. This method is faster and cheaper than dry aging, but it doesn't produce the same depth of flavor. Wet-aged beef is tender, but it lacks the complexity of dry-aged beef. If you want dry-aged beef today, you have to go to a high-end butcher shop or steakhouse, and you'll pay a premium for it. But in the 60s, dry aging was the standard. Every piece of beef you bought from the butcher had been properly aged, and it showed in the flavor. The texture of the meat was also different. Meat from animals that moved around and used their muscles is firmer and has a better texture than meat from animals that stood still all day in a feedlot or confinement barn. This firmness isn't toughness. It's the texture of well-developed muscle. When you bit into a piece of meat from the 60s, you could feel the quality. It had substance, and it was satisfying in a way that modern meat just isn't. People who grew up eating meat in the 60s often say that they don't enjoy meat anymore because it doesn't taste the way they remember. They're not wrong. The meat has fundamentally changed. The animals are raised differently, they're fed differently, they're slaughtered differently, and they're processed differently. Every step of the process affects the final product, and the result is that modern meat is a pale shadow of what it used to be. No factory farming existed, yet the term factory farming didn't even exist in the 1960s because the practice hadn't become widespread yet. Farms were still farms in the traditional sense, places where animals lived outdoors, where they had access to fresh air and sunlight, and where they were cared for by farmers who knew what they were doing. The idea of confining thousands of animals in a single building and treating them like machines would have seemed absurd to most people at the time. But that's exactly what happened over the next few decades. Starting in the 1970s and accelerating through the 80s and 90s, American agriculture underwent a massive transformation. Small farms were bought up by larger operations, which were then bought up by even larger corporations. The focus shifted from quality to quantity, from sustainability to efficiency, from raising animals to producing meat. Factory farms are designed to maximize production and minimize costs. Animals are kept in confinement, where their food, water, and environment can be strictly controlled. Chickens are raised in massive barns that hold tens of thousands of birds. Pigs are kept in gestation crates so small they can't even turn around. Cattle spend the last months of their lives in feedlots standing in mud and their own waste. This is not farming, it's industrial production. And the animals are treated as nothing more than commodities. The meat that comes from factory farms is inferior in every way to the meat that came from traditional farms in the 60s. It's less nutritious, less flavorful, and more likely to be contaminated with bacteria like E. coli and salmonella. It's produced in conditions that are harmful to the animals, to the workers, and to the environment. And it's cheap, which is the only reason people buy it. In the 1960s, cheap meat wasn't the goal. Meat was considered valuable, nutritious food, and people were willing to pay a fair price for it. Families might eat meat a few times a week, but when they did, it was good meat from animals that had been raised properly. Today, meat is so cheap that people eat it multiple times a day without thinking twice about it. But that cheap meat comes with hidden costs to your health, to animal welfare, to the environment, and to rural communities. Factory farming has also created massive environmental problems. The concentration of thousands of animals in one place creates enormous amounts of waste that has to go somewhere. That waste often ends up polluting rivers, streams, and groundwater. The runoff from factory farms has created dead zones in bodies of water where nothing can live because the pollution has used up all the oxygen. The smell from these operations can be overwhelming, affecting the quality of life for people who live nearby. The small farms of the 60s didn't have these problems. When animals are spread out over the landscape, their waste becomes fertilizer for the fields. It's part of a natural cycle where nutrients are returned to the soil and the land remains productive. But when you concentrate thousands of animals in one place, the waste becomes a toxic problem that has to be managed. And despite regulations, many factory farms do a poor job of managing that waste, which is why we have widespread pollution from agricultural runoff. The rise of factory farming also destroyed the economic viability of small farms. When a factory farm can produce chicken for pennies per pound, a small farmer who's raising chickens on pasture can't compete on price. The small farmer's costs are higher because his methods are more labor-intensive and less efficient, but the quality of his product is far superior. Unfortunately, most consumers choose based on price, not quality, and so the factory farms win and the small farms disappear. In the 1960s, factory farming was still in its infancy. Most of the meat in the country came from traditional farms, but today the situation is reversed. The vast majority of meat comes from factory farms, and small traditional farms are a tiny niche market. If you want meat that's anything like what people ate in the 60s, you have to seek it out from small producers and you have to be willing to pay more for it. But the difference in quality is night and day. Why modern meat is making us sick. All the changes in how we raise and process animals over the last 50 years have had profound effects on public health. The meat most Americans eat today is fundamentally different from the meat of the 1960s, and those differences are contributing to chronic disease. Heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and obesity have all skyrocketed. And while multiple factors are involved, the decline in meat quality plays a major role. Modern factory farmed meat is higher in total fat and saturated fat, and lower in beneficial nutrients like omega-3 fatty acids, CLA, and antioxidants. Grain-fed beef replaced nutrient-dense grass-fed beef, producing a product that contributes to inflammation and metabolic disease rather than supporting health. Animals are no longer raised on pastures where they can graze naturally. Instead, they are confined in crowded feedlots and fed diets entirely unlike what their bodies are designed to digest. Cattle consume corn, soy, and sometimes even candy or bakery waste, while chickens may be given arsenic to promote growth and enhance meat color, and pigs are fed growth-promoting ractopamine, substances that would never have been considered appropriate for animal feed in the 60s. Factory farms also rely heavily on antibiotics, growth hormones, and other drugs, which leave residues in the meat and may disrupt human health over time. Antibiotic resistance is now a global concern, in part fueled by the routine dosing of healthy animals, and hormone residues may affect human endocrine systems. Contamination is another major issue. Crowded, unsanitary conditions and high-speed processing create an environment where harmful bacteria like E. coli, O157-H7, and Salmonella thrive, pathogens that were rare or non-existent in the 60s. Finally, we've lost knowledge of food and farming. Back then, people knew their butcher and farmer and understood how animals were raised. Today, most meat is anonymous, packaged in plastic, and disconnected from its source. The result is meat that is cheaper and more abundant than ever, but far less nourishing, riskier to consume, and a shadow of the nutrient-rich, clean, and naturally produced meat that our grandparents enjoyed. The first step is understanding what we've lost. Meat in the 1960s was a superfood because animals were raised naturally on pasture, eating grass with fresh air and sunlight, not pumped full of drugs or fed unnatural diets. Today, to get anything close, look for grass-fed beef and pasture-raised chicken or pork from small farms. It costs more, but the meat is nutrient-dense, flavorful, and free from antibiotics and contaminants, while supporting better farming practices. More people are demanding quality food, helping small farms grow. We may not fully return to the 60s, but we can move in that direction. Let me know in the comments if you remember eating meat in the 60s and whether you think it tasted different than what we have today. And make sure to sign up for the newsletter, where we explore more topics about how food and life have changed over the decades. Thank you so much for watching.